The melody drifted from her lips like smoke, a wisp of something half-forgotten, clinging to the quiet air of the suburban kitchen. It danced around the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches she meticulously prepared, a counterpoint to the rhythmic thud of the knife against the cutting board. Sun streamed through the window, painting stripes of warmth across the checkered linoleum. Abby hummed, lost in the mundane ritual of motherhood, the tune an unconscious echo of a life she had carefully tucked away. "Mom, you're doing it again," Emily, her 12-year-old daughter, observed from the kitchen table, a mischievous glint in her eyes. A scattering of colored pencils and half-finished sketches lay before her, evidence of a burgeoning artistic spirit. Abby startled slightly, the melody dying on her lips. "Doing what, sweetie?" she asked, her hand instinctively going to brush a stray strand of hair from her face. A familiar tightness gripped her chest, a phantom ache of a life unlived. "Humming that song," Emily replied, her gaze unwavering. "The one you always hum when you're thinking really hard." "Habits," Abby murmured, her gaze drifting towards a framed photograph perched on the windowsill. It was a younger Abby, barely 18, seated at a grand piano, her fingers poised above the keys, a look of fierce concentration etched on her face. Westmore Academy of Music. The gilded frame felt heavy, a physical manifestation of the weight of her past. Habits. The word echoed in her mind, a dismissive label for the persistent whisper of music that refused to be silenced. 15 years. 15 years since she'd last walked the hallowed halls of Westmore, a lifetime ago, it seemed. A different Abby existed within that frame, brimming with ambition, her future a symphony of endless possibilities. That Abby wouldn't recognize the woman she had become: a wife, a mother, a resident of suburban Connecticut, her days filled with carpools and grocery lists, her nights punctuated by the gentle rhythm of her husband's breathing beside her. She closed her eyes, the melody resurfacing, unbidden. Chopin. Nocturne in E-flat major. The notes danced in the silence, weaving a tapestry of memories, the hushed reverence of the concert hall, the scent of polished wood and velvet, the electric thrill of performance. A bittersweet pang of longing resonated within her, a complex cocktail of regret and relief. Had she made the right choice, trading the spotlight for the quiet comfort of family life? The question, a persistent shadow, always lurked at the periphery of her thoughts. The invitation, nestled amongst the bills and junk mail on the kitchen counter, felt like a physical summons. Westmore Academy of Music's 75th anniversary gala. The elegant script mocked her with its promise of a past she could no longer reclaim. She had initially dismissed it, tossing it aside with a dismissive flick of her wrist. But Daniel, her ever-supportive husband, had found it, his eyes alight with an unspoken understanding. He knew the music still lived within her, a caged bird beating against its bars. "You should go, Abby," he'd said, his voice gentle but firm. "It's a part of you, part of her, a part she had tried so desperately to bury." The fear of confrontation, of judgment, was a tangible force, constricting her breath. Lawrence Blackwood. The name, a discordant note, reverberated in her memory. Her rival, her nemesis, now a celebrated conductor, his name synonymous with success. He would be there, basking in the adulation, a constant reminder of the path not taken. The thought of facing him, of facing the whispers and stares, sent a shiver down her spine. "Abby," Emily's voice, laced with concern, pulled her back to the present. "Are you okay? You look pale." Abby forced a smile, a pale imitation of reassurance. "Just thinking, sweetie," she said, her voice a little too bright. "Just thinking about old times." The framed photograph seemed to mock her from the windowsill, a stark reminder of the chasm between the woman she was and the woman she had become. The melody, now a faint echo, still lingered in the air, a testament to the enduring power of music. The gala loomed, a daunting precipice between her present and her past. Could she face the music, both literally and metaphorically? The question hung heavy in the air, unanswered, As she finished packing the lunches, the rhythmic thud of the knife a steady beat against the rising tide of apprehension. Later that evening, after Emily had gone to bed, Abby found herself staring at the invitation again, the elegant script glowing under the soft lamplight. Daniel sat beside her, his hand resting gently on hers, a silent offering of support. "I don't know, Daniel," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's been so long. I'm not that person anymore." He squeezed her hand, his gaze steady and reassuring. "You're still a musician, Abby. It's in your soul. And besides," he added, a hint of a smile playing on his lips, "Emily wants to see you sing." Emily, her daughter, her biggest fan, her constant source of strength. The image of Emily's bright eyes, filled with an unspoken plea, flickered in her mind. Perhaps, just perhaps, facing her past wouldn't be a defeat, but a reclaiming. A chance to show her daughter and herself that the music hadn't died, but had simply been waiting dormant for the right moment to bloom again. A deep breath filled her lungs, a slow release of the tension that had held her captive for so long. The fear hadn't vanished entirely, but it no longer felt insurmountable. A flicker of resolve, a nascent spark of anticipation, ignited within her. The melody, dormant for so long, began to stir, a gentle crescendo of hope rising in the quiet of the evening. The aroma of cinnamon and brewing coffee hung in the air, a familiar comfort in the quiet of the Connecticut morning. Abigail Turner stood at the kitchen island, spreading peanut butter on her daughter Emily's sandwich, her movements automatic, almost hypnotic. The rhythmic scrape of the knife against the jar, the gentle hum of the refrigerator, these were the sounds of her present life. A life far removed from the soaring melodies and thunderous applause that had once defined her. She'd chosen this quiet symphony of domesticity, hadn't she? Chosen it over the chaotic brilliance of the stage. Hadn't she? A sliver of doubt, sharp and cold, pricked at the edges of her contentment. "The kid's music teacher mentioned you again yesterday," Daniel said, his voice warm and laced with amusement as he entered the kitchen. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her with an affectionate smile that always managed to chase away the shadows that lingered at the corners of her mind. Sometimes, though, she felt those shadows were a part of her now, inextricably woven into the fabric of her being. Abby's hand faltered for a fraction of a second, a tremor so slight it was almost imperceptible. "Oh," she replied, her voice carefully neutral. She kept her gaze fixed on the sandwich, as if the swirling patterns of peanut butter held the answers to some profound existential question. The teacher, Mrs. Peterson, was new to town, brimming with enthusiasm and a seemingly inexhaustible supply of anecdotes. Abby braced herself for another rendition of the local legend narrative, a tale that always left her feeling strangely disembodied, like an observer of her own life. She was quite impressed when she heard you were Abigail Turner, you know. Daniel's voice trailed off, a hint of gentle teasing in his tone. He knew this topic was a delicate one, a landscape riddled with emotional landmines. "That was another lifetime," Abby murmured, the words catching in her throat. 15 years. It felt like a century and a blink of an eye all at once. The memory of the stage lights, the weight of the microphone in her hand, the expectant hush of the audience before the first note, these sensations were both distant echoes and vivid phantoms, capable of conjuring a bittersweet ache in her chest. She said something about Westmore Academy. Said you were exceptional. Daniel pushed himself off the doorframe and crossed the room, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. His warmth, his solid presence, anchored her to the present, reminding her of the life she had built, the love she had cultivated. Westmore. The name resonated within her. A chord struck deep within her soul. It was more than just a prestigious music academy. It was a crucible where raw talent was forged into brilliance, where dreams were both nurtured and shattered. It was the place where she had met Lawrence, her rival, her nemesis, the man who had pushed her to her limits and beyond. The memory of his sharp gaze, his relentless ambition, sent a shiver down her spine. The postman's arrival broke the spell. A crisp white envelope landed on the mat, bearing the distinctive crest of the Westmore Academy. Abby felt a sudden constriction in her chest, a premonition of something unsettling. She wiped her hands on a dish towel, a nervous gesture she hadn't realized she'd adopted, and picked up the envelope. The heavy stock of the paper, the elegant calligraphy, it all screamed of a world she had left behind. "It's an invitation," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She unfolded the thick paper, her fingers tracing the embossed lettering. An invitation to the Academy's 25th anniversary gala. A celebration of a past she had tried so hard to bury. Daniel peered over her shoulder, his brow furrowed in thought. "Interesting," he mused. "Seems like they haven't forgotten you." Forgotten. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Had she forgotten them? Or had she simply tried to forget herself, the girl who had lived and breathed music, the girl who had dreamed of standing on the grandest stages of the world, the girl who had walked away from it all? "Two don't know," Abby stammered, a wave of anxiety washing over her. The thought of returning to Westmore, of facing the ghosts of her past, filled her with a sense of dread. She imagined the whispers, the curious glances, the inevitable comparisons. The image of Lawrence Blackwood, his face etched with a triumphant smirk, flashed through her mind. Daniel sensed her hesitation. He gently took the invitation from her hand, his touch reassuring. "We don't have to go, Abby," he said softly. "If it makes you uncomfortable," his words, meant to comfort, only amplified her internal turmoil. Wasn't this the life she had chosen? A life free from the pressures and expectations of the music world? Why then did the thought of returning to Westmore evoke such a potent mixture of fear and longing? A longing she hadn't acknowledged, hadn't even dared to whisper to herself for 15 long years. Emily bounced into the kitchen, her bright, inquisitive eyes taking in the scene. "What's that, Mom?" she asked, pointing to the invitation. "It's an invitation to a party, sweetie," Daniel explained, his voice carefully neutral. He glanced at Abby, a silent question in his eyes. "A fancy party," Emily added, her eyes wide with excitement. "Can we go?" Abby looked at her daughter, at the innocent enthusiasm radiating from her. Emily had inherited her love of music, her natural talent. She saw in Emily a reflection of the girl she once was, a girl brimming with potential, untainted by the harsh realities of the world. Could she deny her daughter the chance to experience the magic of Westmore, the place where her own dreams had taken flight? A deep breath shuddered through Abby. Perhaps it was time to face her past, not to relive it, but to reconcile with it. Perhaps it was time to show Emily and herself that the woman she had become was not defined by the choices she had made, but by the strength and resilience she had gained from them. "Maybe," she said finally, a flicker of resolve in her eyes. "Maybe we should go." The glow of the laptop screen painted Abby's face in a flickering, ethereal light. Around her, the study was hushed, cloaked in the deep blue of a late evening. Rain whispered against the window pane, a soft counterpoint to the melody pouring from the speakers. It was her, 15 years younger, bathed in the warm stage lights of Westmore's concert hall. Her fingers danced over the ivory keys of the Steinway, a cascade of notes flowing from beneath her touch. A phantom ache pulsed in her fingertips, a muscle memory so deeply ingrained, it felt like a betrayal to have let it lie dormant. Why was she torturing herself like this? She'd known she shouldn't have clicked on the link Emily had sent. "Mom, look, it's you," her daughter had exclaimed, her voice bubbling with innocent enthusiasm. But for Abby, it wasn't just a video. It was a portal, sucking her back into a life she'd meticulously buried. The camera panned to her face as she transitioned from the piano intro to the aria. Her younger self, radiating an almost incandescent confidence, met the gaze of the audience. A pang of something sharp, something akin to envy, twisted in Abby's gut. That girl, poised on the precipice of a brilliant future, seemed a stranger now. How could she have walked away? The question, a persistent thorn in her side, pricked at her again. The familiar wave of guilt, so intimately intertwined with the bittersweet nostalgia, threatened to drown her. She reached out a trembling hand and closed the laptop lid, the abrupt silence amplifying the drumming of rain against the glass. The room felt suddenly colder, the vibrant notes replaced by the hollowness that had become her constant companion. Abby, Daniel's voice, soft and concerned, broke the stillness. He stood at the doorway, his silhouette framed by the hallway light. "Everything all right?" She turned, forcing a weak smile. "Just old memories." He crossed the room, his hand warm on her shoulder. He didn't pry, didn't push. Daniel knew, understood the labyrinthine corridors of her heart better than anyone. He'd been her anchor during the turbulent years of her father's illness, the steady hand that guided her through the fog of grief. And now, he was looking at her with that gentle, unwavering support that always managed to chip away at the wall she'd built around herself. "It's the Westmore Gala, isn't it?" Abby sighed, the weight of the unspoken words settling heavy in her chest. "I don't understand why they even sent me an invitation. It's been 15 years. He sat beside her, drawing her close. "They remember you, Abby. Professor Winters still speaks of you with such admiration." The mention of her former mentor brought a fresh wave of emotion. Professor Winters, with her sharp wit and unwavering belief in Abby's talent, had been more than just a teacher. She'd been a confidant, a guide. "I can't go back there, Daniel. I don't belong in that world anymore." "You should go," he said quietly, his voice laced with an understanding that went beyond words. Abby stiffened, pulling slightly away. "You don't understand. Lawrence will be there." The name, even after all these years, tasted like ash in her mouth. Daniel's hand tightened on hers. He knew the history, the bitter rivalry that had culminated in that final recital. Lawrence Blackwood, with his prodigious talent and ruthless ambition, had always seen her as a threat. And now, after all this time, the thought of facing him, of being exposed to his judgment, filled her with a paralyzing dread. "It doesn't matter, Abby. Not anymore." "But it does matter," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "It matters because that's the life I walked away from. The life everyone expected me to have." He turned her to face him, his eyes searching hers. "Maybe it's not about going back, Abby. Maybe it's about making peace with a part of yourself you've kept locked away for so long." His words resonated deep within her, a quiet echo of a truth she'd been avoiding for 15 years. A part of her, buried deep beneath layers of responsibility and self-imposed exile, still yearned for the music. She could feel it now, a faint tremor of longing, a flicker of the fire she thought she'd extinguished. The rain outside intensified, mirroring the tempest within her. She closed her eyes, images of the past swirling in the darkness behind her eyelids. The hushed reverence of the concert hall, the intoxicating thrill of a perfectly executed phrase, the warmth of the spotlight and Lawrence's sneering face, his words dripping with venomous disdain. "He'll try to humiliate me," she murmured, the words barely audible. Daniel's thumb stroked her cheek, a gesture of comfort and reassurance. "Let him try," he said, his voice firm. "You're not that girl anymore, Abby. You're stronger, wiser. You've lived a life filled with love and purpose. And your music, it's a part of you. It always will be." His words, imbued with unwavering belief, began to chip away at the icy fear that had gripped her. A flicker of defiance sparked within her, a nascent ember glowing in the ashes of her doubt. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was time to confront the ghosts of her past, not to reclaim the life she'd lost, but to integrate it into the woman she had become. The silence stretched, filled only by the rhythm of the rain. And in that silence, a seed of resolve began to take root. The attic air hung thick and still, a blend of dust motes dancing in the lone shaft of moonlight and the faint scent of cedar from the chest beneath the eaves. Abigail hesitated at the top of the creaking stairs, a hand resting on the rough-hewn banister. 15 years. 15 years since she'd last climbed these steps, since she'd last sought solace in this space, crammed with the ghosts of a life she'd almost forgotten. The Gala Lawrence's barbed words, they echoed in her ears, a dissonant chord that resonated with a part of her she thought long dormant. A nervous flutter, low in her belly, mirrored the hesitant beat of her heart. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was unease, like a string pulled taut, vibrating with an energy she hadn't felt in years. She finally pushed open the attic door, the hinges groaning a mournful protest. The moonlight illuminated a chaotic landscape of forgotten treasures and discarded memories. An old rocking horse with a chipped mane stood guard in the corner, its vacant eyes seeming to follow her every move. Stacks of dusty books lined the walls, their spines cracked and faded. And there, tucked beneath the eaves, sat the cedar chest. Her breath hitched in her throat, a sudden tightness constricting her chest. It was as though a forgotten melody, once familiar and comforting, had suddenly resurfaced, tugging at the edges of her consciousness. She crossed the room, her footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust that coated the floorboards. Each step felt weighted, each breath measured. Kneeling before the chest, she ran a hand over the smooth, polished wood, the cool surface a stark contrast to the sudden heat that flushed her cheeks. The latch clicked open with a soft snap, releasing a wave of memories, the pungent aroma of aged paper, the faint whisper of dried lavender, the ghost of her father's pipe tobacco clinging to the air. It was the scent of her childhood, of a time before responsibility and sacrifice had muted the vibrant hues of her dreams. Inside, nestled amongst layers of yellowed tissue paper, lay the remnants of her past life, stacks of sheet music, worn and dog-eared, bearing the intricate markings of her youthful ambition, notebooks filled with hastily scribbled melodies and lyrics. The ink faded, but the passion still palpable. Concert programs, their edges frayed, whispering tales of standing ovations and breathless encores. She lifted a handful of the scores, her fingers tracing the familiar notes of Bach, Mozart, Schubert, the composers who had once been her constant companions, their music the language of her soul. Her gaze fell upon a slim, leather-bound notebook, its cover embossed with the crest of Westmore Academy. She opened it carefully, the brittle pages rustling like autumn leaves. Inside, written in her own youthful hand, were the lyrics to a song she had composed, a melancholic melody about the fleeting nature of time and the bittersweet ache of lost dreams. A faint smile touched her lips as she hummed the melody, the notes resonating in the stillness of the attic, a fragile echo of a voice she thought she'd lost. The melody, once a lament, now felt different, richer, deeper, imbued with the complexities of a life she had lived. The years of silence hadn't erased her talent, they had seasoned it. The sacrifices she had made, the joys and sorrows she had experienced, the love she had given and received, all of it had woven itself into the fabric of her being, enriching the timbre of her voice, deepening the resonance of her soul. The fear that had gripped her earlier, the self-doubt that had whispered insidious lies in her ear, they began to dissipate, replaced by a nascent sense of peace. Not resignation, but acceptance, an understanding that her life, though different from the one she had envisioned, was no less meaningful, no less rich. She closed her eyes, letting the melody wash over her, carrying her back to the concert halls of her youth, to the thrill of the spotlight, the rush of adrenaline, the connection with the audience. But this time, the memories didn't evoke a sense of longing or regret. Instead, they felt like a foundation, a solid base upon which she could build something new. The girl who had stood on those stages, her voice soaring above the orchestra, was still a part of her. But she was no longer defined by that girl, by the accolades and applause. She was a woman now, a wife, a mother, a woman who had chosen a different path, a path that had led her to a different kind of fulfillment. She continued to hum, the melody growing stronger, more confident. The dust motes danced in the moonlight, swirling around her like tiny, ethereal spirits, witnesses to her reawakening. The attic, once a repository of forgotten dreams, now felt like a sanctuary, a place where she could reconnect with a part of herself she had long neglected. And as the last notes faded into the stillness of the night, A quiet strength settled within her, a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. The gala, Lawrence's challenge, they no longer seemed like insurmountable obstacles, but rather opportunities. Opportunities to confront her past, to embrace her present, and to step into a future she was finally ready to create. The fear had been replaced by a flicker of anticipation, the unease by a quiet hum of resolve. The heavy parchment felt strangely anachronistic in her hands, an embossed invitation to the Blackwood Academy's 75th anniversary gala. Abby traced the ornate lettering with her fingertip, the rough texture a stark contrast to the smooth, cool porcelain of her morning teacup. 15 years. 15 years since those hallowed halls had echoed with her voice. 15 years since the weight of expectation had pressed down on her young shoulders. Now, the invitation felt like a summons, a ghost from a past she thought she had laid to rest. "Are you going to stare at it all day, love?" Daniel's voice, warm and laced with amusement, broke through the fog of her memories. He leaned against the kitchen doorway, sunlight catching the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes. Abby started, a flicker of guilt crossing her features. He always saw through her, right through the carefully constructed walls she built around her vulnerabilities. "Just thinking," she murmured, folding the invitation along its crease. "Thinking about what it would be like to walk those halls again." Daniel pushed off the doorframe, crossing the room to place a gentle kiss on her forehead. She closed her eyes, inhaling the familiar scent of his aftershave, a grounding presence in the swirling vortex of her thoughts. He doesn't understand, she thought, the familiar pang of anxiety tightening her chest. He can't understand what it was like, the pressure, the expectations. He'd heard the stories, of course, of her near-meteoric rise, of the whispers that followed her through the Academy's corridors the next Blackwood, they'd called her. But hearing the stories wasn't the same as living them. "You should go," Daniel said softly, his voice echoing her thoughts. "It's a part of you, Abby. A part you shouldn't hide away." She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. The unwavering support she saw there mirrored her own feelings for him. The quiet strength he'd shown in the face of her father's illness, the years he'd stood by her as she traded a concert hall for a hospital room. He didn't push, didn't demand, simply offered a quiet harbor in the storm of her indecision. "But what if they expect me to sing?" The words tumbled out, barely a whisper. The thought of standing on a stage again, of facing the judgment of her former peers, sent a shiver down her spine. "Then sing," Daniel said, his voice firm. "Sing for yourself, Abby. Not for them. For the girl who used to fill these rooms with music." He gestured towards their living room, where her old piano sat silent, draped in a dust cloth, a monument to a life she had left behind. His words struck a chord within her, a faint resonance of the joy she had once found in music. A joy that had become buried under layers of responsibility and self-doubt. Emily, their daughter, bounded into the kitchen, her bright, inquisitive eyes fixed on the invitation in Abby's hand. "What's that, Mommy?" she asked, her voice filled with the innocent curiosity of a 12-year-old. "It's an invitation to my old music school, sweetheart," Abby replied, forcing a smile. "The one where you used to sing?" Emily's eyes widened. "Will you sing there again, Mommy? Please." She had heard the recordings, the faint echoes of her mother's voice, and held them with a reverence Abby herself had long forgotten. The weight of her daughter's innocent plea settled upon Abby, a gentle pressure that felt different from the crushing weight of past expectations. This wasn't about proving anything to anyone, not about reclaiming lost glory. This was about sharing a part of herself with the person who mattered most. A deep breath filled her lungs, pushing back the lingering tendrils of fear. Looking at her husband, at her daughter, she saw not judgment, but love, not expectation, but acceptance. The tightness in her chest began to ease, replaced by a tentative flicker of excitement. She picked up a pen, the smooth weight familiar in her hand. For a moment, she hesitated, the ghost of her past whispering warnings in her ear. "They will judge you. They will remember your failure." But then, Daniel's words echoed in her mind. "Sing for yourself." And Emily's hopeful gaze provided the final push. With a steady hand, she inscribed her name on the RSVP card, the simple act feeling like a declaration, a reclaiming of a part of herself she thought she had lost. "Thank you for including me," she wrote, the words flowing onto the paper with a newfound confidence. "I would be honored to attend." As she sealed the envelope, a sense of anticipation, tinged with a healthy dose of trepidation, began to bloom within her. The gala loomed ahead, a daunting yet exhilarating prospect, a bridge between her past and her present, a chance to finally confront the ghosts that had haunted her for so long. She didn't know what awaited her there, what challenges she would face, but for the first time in 15 years, she felt a flicker of hope, a sense of possibility, a quiet understanding that perhaps, just perhaps, she was ready to sing again. The crystal chandeliers of the Westmore Academy of Music cast a shimmering, almost ethereal glow on the opulent ballroom. The air, thick with the perfume of expensive flowers and the murmur of polite conversation, felt heavy on Abigail's skin. 15 years. 15 years since she'd last stepped foot within these hallowed halls, and the weight of it pressed down on her chest, constricting her breath. She smoothed down the emerald green dress Daniel had insisted she wear, a dress that felt both too elegant and too revealing, a stark contrast to the comfortable, practical clothes she'd grown accustomed to. Around her, women in glittering gowns and men in tailored suits moved with an effortless grace that only amplified her own sense of displacement. A nervous tremor ran through her. This had been a mistake. She should have listened to that insistent inner voice that had warned her against coming. She should be at home, curled up on the sofa with Emily, a mug of hot chocolate warming her hands. Suddenly, a familiar voice cut through the hum of the crowd. "Abigail? Abigail Turner, is that really you?" The warmth in the voice was genuine, a beacon in the sea of unfamiliar faces. Abigail turned to see Professor Winters, her former vocal coach, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her eyes sparkling with a familiar kindness. Relief washed over Abby, a momentary reprieve from the suffocating anxiety that had been building within her. "Professor Winters," she breathed, a small, hesitant smile touching her lips. It felt strange, seeing the woman who had once held her dreams in her hands, the woman who had believed in her talent more than she had believed in it herself. A wave of bittersweet nostalgia washed over her, a poignant reminder of a path not taken. "My dear girl," Professor Winters exclaimed, pulling Abby into a warm embrace. "It's so wonderful to see you after all these years. You look—" She paused, her gaze sweeping over Abby, a mix of appraisal and something akin to sadness in her eyes. "Well, you look happy." The words hung in the air, a gentle probing that pricked at Abby's carefully constructed composure. Happy? Yes, she was happy. Wasn't she? The question echoed in the silent chambers of her heart, a disquieting whisper against the loud pronouncements of her mind. Before Abby could respond, a ripple of excitement, tinged with something that felt almost like reverence, spread through the room. The name Lawrence Blackwood danced on the whispers that snaked through the crowd. Abby's stomach clenched. Lawrence! The memory of their fierce rivalry, the constant push and pull of their ambition, the shared dream that had driven them both, rose to the surface, sharp and unwelcome. She hadn't thought about him in years, had deliberately pushed those memories to the darkest corners of her mind. Now, here he was, the subject of hushed whispers and admiring glances, his name synonymous with success, with the very dream she had abandoned. He stood at the center of a small group, radiating charisma and confidence, his laughter ringing out, a clear, resonant sound that cut through the air like a finely tuned instrument. The sight of him, so effortlessly at ease in this world she had left behind, stirred a complex cocktail of emotions within her: resentment, envy, a strange flicker of pride, and a deep, gnawing regret that she quickly pushed away. As if drawn by some invisible force, Lawrence's gaze landed on Abby. He excused himself from the group and strode towards her, a confident smile playing on his lips. The years had been kind to him, refining his features, adding a touch of maturity to his boyish charm. He stopped before her, his eyes, sharp and intelligent, taking her in, lingering on the slight nervousness in her posture. "Abigail Turner," he said, his voice smooth as velvet. "Is that really you?" The same question Professor Winters had asked, yet in Lawrence's voice, it carried a different weight, a subtle undercurrent of something that felt like mockery. "Lawrence," Abby replied, her voice tighter than she intended. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. "It's been a long time." An understatement, she thought, the vast expanse of 15 years stretching between them like a chasm. "Indeed," he said, his gaze sweeping over her again, this time lingering on her simple dress, a stark contrast to the glittering gowns surrounding them. "What have you been doing with all that potential, Abigail?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken judgment. Abby felt her cheeks flush. The casual inquiry, laced with a condescending edge, felt like a public dissection of her life choices. She could feel the weight of the gazes of the other attendees, their silent scrutiny adding another layer to her discomfort. Her carefully constructed composure began to crumble. She wanted to retort, to defend her choices, to tell him that her life, though different from the path she had once envisioned, was full and meaningful. She wanted to tell him about Emily, about the quiet joy of watching her daughter grow, about the unwavering support of her husband, about the peace she had found in a life away from the spotlight. But the words caught in her throat, choked by the sudden resurgence of the old insecurities, the doubts that had plagued her for years. Had she made the right choice? Had she wasted her gift? Lawrence's question, seemingly innocuous, had struck a nerve, reopening old wounds she thought had long since healed. A small, defiant voice whispered in the back of her mind, "Don't let him see you falter. Don't let him win." She took a deep breath, forcing herself to meet his gaze. A flicker of something surprise crossed his features. Perhaps he had expected her to crumble under his scrutiny. Perhaps he had underestimated the strength she had gained in the years away from the relentless pressure of the music world. The thought gave her a sliver of strength, a small spark of defiance that began to burn within her. The gala, once a source of dread, was now a battleground, and she, whether she liked it or not, was about to fight. The crystal chandeliers of the Westmore Academy of Music cast a kaleidoscope of light across the opulent ballroom. The air, thick with the perfume of expensive floral arrangements and the subtle tang of champagne, vibrated with the low hum of conversations. Abigail felt a tremor of unease beneath the silk of her dress, a disquiet that echoed the frantic fluttering in her chest. 15 years. 15 years since she last stood within these hallowed halls, the weight of expectation pressing down on her like a physical burden. Tonight, she was not Abigail Turner, the rising star, the prodigy. Tonight, she was Mrs. Daniel Turner, a wife, a mother, a ghost of her former self. Lawrence's voice, smooth as polished marble, cut through the polite chatter. "Abigail, it's been far too long." His smile didn't quite reach his eyes, a subtle coldness lurking beneath the surface. A group of impeccably dressed men and women, Lawrence's entourage, gravitated towards them, their expressions a curious mixture of deference and amusement. Abby's grip on her champagne flute tightened. She recognized some of them, faces etched with the familiar ambition and competitive spirit that had defined their years at Westmore. They were all successful now, their names echoing in concert halls and opera houses across the world. Abby forced a smile, the muscles in her face feeling stiff and unnatural. "Lawrence, it's good to see you. Good to see you." The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. "Don't you miss it?" The question, seemingly casual, hung in the air, heavy with unspoken judgment. Abby felt the scrutiny of their gazes, each glance a subtle reminder of the path not taken. Miss it? Miss this suffocating pressure, the endless rehearsals, the relentless pursuit of perfection? A bitter laugh threatened to escape her lips. She swallowed it down, replacing it with a carefully neutral expression. "I made my choice. Family needed me." The words felt inadequate, a flimsy shield against the wave of their collective disapproval. "They think I wasted my gift," she thought, the familiar sting of self-doubt surfacing. They think I'm a failure. Daniel's hand found hers beneath the table, his warm touch a silent reassurance. He squeezed gently, a subtle message of support that eased the knot in her stomach. He understands, she thought, a flicker of warmth chasing away the chill of insecurity. He knows what truly matters. Lawrence's laughter, a sharp, brittle sound, sliced through the air. Family? Such a noble sacrifice, Abigail. But tell me, truly, haven't you ever regretted it? Haven't you ever wondered what could have been? His words, laced with a subtle contempt, struck a raw nerve. Abby felt a flush of anger rise in her cheeks, the quiet hum of the ballroom fading as her focus narrowed to Lawrence's mocking gaze. He wants to see me break, she realized, the realization bringing a strange clarity. He wants to confirm his own success by showcasing my supposed failure. Regret is a luxury I can't afford, she replied, her voice steadier than she expected. I have a beautiful family, a life filled with love and laughter. That's more than any standing ovation could ever give me. The words resonated with a quiet conviction, a truth that settled deep within her bones. I wouldn't trade it, she thought, a surge of fierce protectiveness washing over her. Not for all the applause in the world. The conversation shifted, the others joining in with thinly veiled inquiries about her life outside of music. Each question felt like a probing finger, seeking out the cracks in her carefully constructed facade. Abby answered politely, her responses measured and evasive, deflecting their curiosity with practiced ease. The ballroom's glittering facade felt increasingly suffocating, the air heavy with unspoken expectations. Then, with a dramatic flourish, Lawrence turned to the small stage set up at the far end of the room. He raised his hands, silencing the murmuring crowd. Abigail, he announced, his voice amplified by the microphone, it seems our esteemed alumna has chosen a different path, a quieter life. But surely, she hasn't forgotten her gift entirely? Wouldn't it be a treat for us all to hear that magnificent voice once more? A ripple of anticipation ran through the crowd, their eyes turning towards Abby with a mixture of curiosity and expectation. Abby froze, her breath catching in her throat. He wouldn't dare, she thought, a wave of panic washing over her. He's trying to humiliate me. The room spun, the faces blurring into a sea of expectant smiles. She felt Daniel's hand tighten around hers, his presence a solid anchor in the swirling chaos. He leaned in, his voice a low murmur against her ear. You don't have to do this, Abby. Let's go home. His words, filled with understanding and support, were a lifeline. She could leave, walk away from the whispers and the stares, retreat back into the safety of her quiet life. But then, a different feeling began to stir within her, a flicker of defiance that pushed back against the fear. He thinks he can break me, she thought, her gaze hardening as she met Lawrence's smug smile. He thinks I'm a shadow of my former self. A slow smile spread across her face, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. All right, Lawrence, she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the expectant silence. I'll sing. A gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by a wave of murmurs. Abby took a deep breath, the familiar scent of polished wood and beeswax filling her lungs. As she walked towards the stage, she felt a shift within her, a shedding of the anxieties and doubts that had weighed her down for so long. She was no longer Abigail Turner, the prodigy burdened by expectation. She was Abigail Turner, a woman, a wife, a mother, a singer, and she had a story to tell. The hushed expectancy of the grand hall pressed down on Abigail, a physical weight against her chest. Crystal chandeliers cast a shimmering, almost hallucinatory light, reflecting off the polished floor and the expectant faces in the audience. A faint scent of lilies, the Academy's signature flower, mingled with the perfume of anticipation, a heady mix that made her stomach churn. 15 years. 15 years since she'd last stood on a stage like this, the polished wood gleaming beneath the stage lights like a dark, inviting pool. Her fingers clasped tightly before her, felt cold and clammy. Lawrence, his triumph, a tangible aura around him, stood to the side, a smirk playing on his lips. He had wanted this moment of public reckoning, this opportunity to showcase her supposed downfall. Hadn't he always thrived on comparison, on the stark contrast between his ascent and her descent? The thought, bitter and sharp, pricked at her. Descent. Was that how he saw it? Her choice? Her sacrifice? A low hum of conversation rippled through the audience, the sound 1,000 tiny needles against her already frayed nerves. She could almost feel their gazes dissecting her, judging her. The quiet life she had built, the love she had nurtured, the very essence of her being felt suddenly fragile, exposed under the scrutiny of this glittering crowd. She swallowed hard, the lump in her throat refusing to budge. This wasn't her world anymore. This belonged to Lawrence, to the driven, the ambitious, the ones who hadn't chosen the messy, complicated beauty of family over the sterile perfection of art. But then a different image surfaced, pushing through the fog of anxiety. Daniel, his hand warm and steady in hers, his eyes filled with unwavering support. Emily's bright, adoring gaze, her whispered words of encouragement echoing in her heart. Her father, his frail hand reaching for hers, his smile a beacon of unconditional love. And suddenly, the fear didn't vanish, not entirely, but it shifted, morphed into something else. A quiet resolve, a strength born not of ambition, but of love. She had lived a life richer, deeper than any melody she could have sung on this stage. And perhaps, just perhaps, that life had given her something more profound to offer than mere technical brilliance. Taking a slow, deliberate breath, she met Lawrence's gaze. The smirk remained, but beneath it, she detected a flicker of something else. Uncertainty? Perhaps even fear? The realization sent a ripple of unexpected confidence through her. This wasn't about him. This was about her. About reclaiming not her past, but her present. About sharing the story etched, not in accolades and applause, but in the quiet corners of her heart. Her voice, when she spoke, was surprisingly steady. "I'll need a pianist." The words hung in the air, a stark contrast to the whispers and murmurs that had filled the hall moments before. A ripple of movement went through the orchestra, a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Professor Winters, her former vocal coach, her face etched with concern and a flicker of hope, hurried towards the grand piano, her fingers hovering over the keys as if eager to lend their support. The professor's presence was a balm, a tangible link to a past that felt both distant and intimately close. She nodded at Abby, a silent exchange of understanding passing between them, a recognition of the weight of the moment. As the first chords of O mio bambino caro filled the hall, Abigail closed her eyes. The familiar melody, a piece she had sung countless times, felt different now. It wasn't just a song anymore. It was a prayer, a confession, a testament to the love that had shaped her life. The love for her father, the man who had taught her the true meaning of sacrifice. The love for Daniel, the man who had shown her the quiet strength of unwavering support. The love for Emily, the child who reminded her of the boundless capacity of the human heart. When she opened her eyes, the hall seemed to fade away. The expectant faces blurred, the glittering chandeliers dimmed, the very air around her seemed to still. There was only the music, the story she was pouring into each note, each phrase. The initial tremor in her voice, a vestige of her earlier anxiety, gradually gave way to a strength, a richness that resonated through the hall. It wasn't the technically perfect voice of the prodigy she once was. It was something more. It was a voice imbued with the complexities of life, the echoes of laughter and tears, the quiet strength of a love that had weathered storms and emerged, not unscathed, but whole. The silence that followed the last note was absolute, a silence so profound it felt almost tangible. Then, a single gasp broke the spell, followed by another, and another, until the hall erupted in a wave of applause, a tidal wave of appreciation that washed over her, leaving her breathless. She saw tears in Professor Winter's eyes, a proud smile on Daniel's face, and in Emily's gaze, a radiant, unwavering adoration. Even Lawrence, his smirk finally gone, seemed momentarily stunned, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and, was it respect? In that moment, standing on the stage, bathed in the warm glow of the applause, Abigail knew she had done more than just sing a song. She had shared a piece of her soul, a testament to the life she had chosen, a life that was, in its own quiet way, a masterpiece. The fear was gone, replaced by a sense of peace, a quiet understanding that the true measure of a life wasn't in the applause of a crowd, but in the echoes of love that resonated within her heart. The applause began as a ripple, a hesitant wave in the hushed hall, then swelled into a roaring crescendo. Abby stood, bathed in the warm glow of the stage lights, feeling the vibrations of the music still humming through her. Her heart pounded a wild rhythm against her ribs, a counterpoint to the lingering notes of the piano. For 15 years, this sound, this feeling of connection with an audience, had existed only in the shadowed corners of her memory. Now, it was real, visceral, a tide pulling her back to a shore she thought she had left behind. She hadn't anticipated this raw, unfiltered wave of appreciation. She had expected polite applause, perhaps a few murmurs of approval. This standing ovation was something else entirely. It felt like vindication, not for her talent, which she had never truly doubted, but for the life she had chosen. Lawrence, standing at the edge of the stage, looked as if he'd been struck. His carefully composed facade crumbled, replaced by a flicker of something Abby couldn't quite decipher. Shock? Disbelief? A sliver of admiration? She couldn't be sure. The spotlight, meant to isolate her, now felt like a shield, protecting her from the complex emotions swirling in the dimly lit hall. She saw her daughter, Emily, beaming from the front row, her small hands clapping furiously. Daniel, beside her, wore an expression of quiet pride, his eyes mirroring the warmth that spread through Abby's chest. In that moment, surrounded by strangers and the echoes of her song, Abby felt a profound sense of belonging, not to the stage, but to the life she had built away from it. The applause finally began to subside, replaced by a murmur of excited conversation. People surged towards the stage, their faces alight with enthusiasm. Abby descended the steps, her legs still trembling slightly, and was immediately enveloped in a throng of well-wishers. That was breathtaking, Abigail, a woman with kind eyes and silver hair gushed, clutching Abby's hand. I had no idea you had maintained such excellence. Abby offered a hesitant smile. Excellence. The word felt strange, almost foreign. She hadn't strived for excellence, not in the way she had as a young, ambitious student. She had strived for something else, entirely a life filled with love, family, and the quiet joy of making music for herself, for her daughter, for the simple pleasure of it. Professor Winters, her former vocal coach, embraced her warmly. Abigail, my dear, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. You've blossomed. Your voice, it has a depth, a richness it never had before. Abby looked at the older woman, her eyes welling up. It's life, Professor, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Life has given me my voice. Professor Winters smiled knowingly, a glimmer of understanding in her eyes. The crowd thinned, leaving Abby standing with Daniel and Emily. Emily threw her arms around Abby, squeezing her tightly. Mommy, you were amazing, she exclaimed, her voice filled with awe. Daniel simply smiled and took Abby's hand, his touch a silent reassurance. I knew you were still incredible, he whispered, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles. Abby leaned into him, drawing strength from his presence. The anxieties that had plagued her earlier in the evening had vanished, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. Lawrence approached, his expression a carefully constructed mask of professionalism. The earlier flicker of vulnerability was gone, replaced by the familiar glint of ambition. Abigail, he said, extending a hand. That was unexpected. Truly remarkable. Abby hesitated for a moment, then shook his hand. His grip was firm, almost too tight. "Thank you, Lawrence," she replied, her voice even. "I must admit," he continued, a predatory gleam in his eyes, "I underestimated you. I see now that you possess a unique talent, a raw emotional power that could captivate audiences worldwide. I'd be remiss if I didn't offer you a place in my upcoming opera season. The leading role, of course." His voice was smooth, persuasive, dripping with the promise of fame and recognition. Abby met his gaze, her expression unwavering. A whirlwind of thoughts raced through her mind. The lure of the stage, the thrill of performing, the validation she had craved for so long, it was all there, dangling before her like a forbidden fruit. But something had shifted within her. The years of quiet dedication, the love she shared with her family, the simple joy of music unbound by ambition, these were the things that truly mattered. "Thank you for the offer, Lawrence," she said, her voice calm and steady. "But I'm not interested." Lawrence's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Not interested?" he repeated, incredulous. "Abigail, this is the opportunity of a lifetime. The exposure, the acclaim, I understand." Abby interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. "But I don't need spotlights or reviews to affirm that music matters in my life. It's a part of me, woven into the fabric of my days. I sing for my daughter, for my husband, for myself. And that's enough." A flicker of something akin to anger crossed Lawrence's face, quickly masked by a forced smile. "I see," he said, his voice tight. "Well, if you change your mind," Abby shook her head. "I won't." She turned to Daniel and Emily, a warm smile spreading across her face. "Let's go home," she said, taking their hands. As they walked away, the murmur of the gala faded behind them, replaced by the quiet rhythm of their footsteps and the silent melody of a life lived on her own terms. The applause, the accolades, the tempting whispers of a resurrected career, they were echoes of a past she had left behind, replaced by the resonant harmony of the present. And in that harmony, Abby found a truth more profound, more fulfilling than any standing ovation. The biting November air nipped at Abigail's exposed shoulders as she stepped away from the gala's opulent glow. The city lights blurred, a kaleidoscope of shimmering uncertainty reflecting her own swirling emotions. Inside, the echoes of applause still resonated within her, a phantom vibration against her skin. Lawrence's stunned face, the grudging respect in Professor Winter's eyes, these images flickered in her mind, each a brushstroke on the canvas of a night she wouldn't soon forget. A strange lightness filled her, a sense of closure she hadn't realized she craved. It wasn't the triumphant return of a prodigal daughter. It was something quieter, more profound. A reconciliation. Professor Winters caught up with her, her breath misting in the cold. "Abigail, wait." Her voice, though aged, still held the same warmth Abby remembered from her student days. "Professor," Abby greeted, a genuine smile gracing her lips. The formality felt strange now, a relic of a past life. She almost wanted to call her Eleanor, but the years and the unspoken chasm between their paths held her back. "That was magnificent," Eleanor said, her eyes shining. "The depth, the control, you've only grown, Abigail. Life has been kind to your voice." Abby's smile faltered, a ripple of uncertainty disturbing the placid surface of her composure. "Kind?" She thought of the sacrifices, the endless nights by her father's bedside, the dreams she'd tucked away. Were those acts of kindness or unnecessary amputations? "Life has changed it," she corrected softly. "Shaped it, perhaps." Eleanor's gaze softened with understanding. "Sometimes, the most profound art comes from the silences, from the notes we choose not to sing." She paused, then added, "The Crestwood School of Music is starting a new community outreach program. We're looking for experienced vocalists to teach. Would you consider it?" The offer hung in the air, shimmering like a mirage. A path not taken, now re-emerging, paved with different intentions. The spotlight she had shunned for so long was now being offered on her own terms. Abby's heart hammered against her ribs, a chaotic rhythm against the calm she'd so carefully cultivated. "I'll think about it," she managed, the words a fragile shield against the rush of possibilities. Daniel was waiting by the car, his silhouette a comforting presence in the darkness. As she approached, he opened the door for her, the small gesture a familiar ritual in their shared life. The car's warmth enveloped her, a welcome contrast to the biting wind. "So," Daniel began, his voice gentle, "tell me everything." The drive home was a tapestry of shared words and silences, of laughter and quiet reflection. Abby recounted the events of the evening, her voice tinged with a mixture of disbelief and amusement. Daniel listened intently, his hand resting on hers, a silent anchor in the turbulent waters of her memories. "He really thought he could humiliate you," Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. Lawrence always had a flair for the dramatic. Abby smiled, the sting of Lawrence's challenge long gone. "He underestimated me. He underestimated what life, what motherhood, what everything has taught me." As she spoke, a clarity began to crystallize within her, a realization that resonated deep within her soul. The years she'd spent away from the stage weren't years lost, they were years gained. Years filled with a different kind of music, the quiet melodies of family, the harmonious chords of shared love. "I don't want what might have been," she murmured, the words echoing in the quiet confines of the car. "I want what is with a little more music in it." Daniel squeezed her hand, his eyes reflecting the glow of the streetlights. "And you'll have it," he said softly. "Whatever you want." Back in the familiar comfort of their home, surrounded by the soft murmur of Emily's sleeping breaths, Abby felt a profound sense of peace. The gala, the performance, the offer, they were all pieces of a puzzle she hadn't realized she was assembling. She wasn't reclaiming a lost dream. She was weaving a new one, a tapestry rich with the colors of her past and the vibrant hues of her present. 2 months drifted by, each day a quiet affirmation of her decision. The Crestwood School's offer, though tempting, didn't quite resonate with the nascent desire taking root within her. She envisioned something smaller, more intimate, a space where she could nurture budding talents, share the lessons she had learned, not just about music but about life. The Turner Vocal Studio, sign hung above the converted garage, its simple elegance a reflection of Abby's own journey. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the room filled with carefully chosen instruments and sheet music. As her first student, a shy 10-year-old girl clutching a worn music book, nervously approached the piano, Abby felt a familiar thrill course through her. It wasn't the adrenaline rush of a packed concert hall. It was something deeper, the quiet joy of passing on a legacy, of nurturing a passion. She smiled, the years of silence melting away as the first notes of a new melody filled the air. This wasn't a comeback. It was a beginning. Sunlight, filtered through the sheer curtains, painted stripes across the polished wooden floor of the studio. 2 months had passed since the gala. 2 months since the echo of her voice had faded from the grand hall. Yet the resonance lingered within Abigail. It wasn't the applause, though that had been a sweet, unexpected balm, but the feeling of wholeness, of finally exhaling after holding her breath for 15 years. The air in her small, newly renovated studio hummed with a different kind of music now, the tentative, hopeful melodies of beginners. A chipped mug of lukewarm tea sat on the piano, a silent testament to the hours she'd spent nurturing these fledgling voices. "Mom, can you help me with this part?" Emily's voice, clear and bright as a chime, pulled Abby from a reverie. Her daughter stood by the music stand, a slight furrow between her brows as she wrestled with a particularly tricky passage. Abby smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the tea. This, she realized, was the music she was meant to make. Not the soaring arias of concert halls, but the gentle harmonies of shared passion, of passing on a love she had almost lost. Kneeling beside Emily, Abby pointed to the notes. "Try breathing here," she suggested, tapping a finger on the score. "Imagine you're telling a story, not just singing notes." She remembered Professor Winter's words echoing a similar sentiment years ago, a ghost of a memory that no longer held the sting of regret, but a quiet understanding. Back then, the pressure to perform perfectly had overshadowed the joy of the music itself. Now, watching Emily grapple with the melody, she saw a reflection of her younger self, but one unburdened by the weight of expectation. Emily took a deep breath and tried again, the notes now flowing with a newfound fluidity. Abby felt a surge of pride, not just for her daughter's progress, but for the space she had created, a haven where music could be explored without fear of judgment. The other students, a motley crew of aspiring singers ranging from shy teenager to a retired librarian, watched with a mixture of admiration and encouragement. This wasn't the cutthroat world of the academy, where every note was scrutinized and every performance a potential stepping stone or a devastating fall. Here, mistakes were opportunities and vulnerability was celebrated. The thought of Lawrence Blackwood flitted across her mind, a fleeting shadow against the bright backdrop of her present. His attempt to humiliate her had backfired spectacularly, but the memory didn't elicit the anger or resentment she might have expected. Instead, she felt a strange sort of pity. He was still trapped in that relentless pursuit of external validation, a prisoner of his own ambition. She, on the other hand, had found freedom in the quiet corners of her life, in the love of her family and the rediscovery of her passion. Later, as the last student left, the studio fell silent, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Abby sat at the piano, her fingers idly tracing the keys. A melody began to form, a simple, melancholic tune that spoke of lost dreams and second chances. She closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her, a private communion with the emotions she had kept buried for so long. The fear, the doubt, the regret, they were still there, faint echoes in the chambers of her heart, but they no longer held the power to silence her. Daniel found her there, bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her with a gentle smile. "Lost in your music again?" he asked, his voice a warm caress. Abby opened her eyes and met his gaze. "Just thinking," she replied, a soft smile gracing her lips. "Thinking about how life had a way of twisting and turning, leading you down unexpected paths, sometimes through thorny thickets, sometimes through sun-drenched meadows." She had walked both, and the scars and the sunshine were etched onto her soul, making her who she was, a woman who had found her voice not in the thunderous applause of a crowd, but in the quiet whispers of her heart. Daniel walked over and sat beside her on the piano bench, his hand finding hers. "You seem different," he said, searching for the right words. "Lighter, somehow." "I am," she agreed, squeezing his hand. "I think I finally understand what it means to truly listen to myself, to trust the music within, not the noise around me." He nodded, his eyes reflecting the golden light streaming through the window. "And what does it say?" he asked softly. Abby leaned her head against his shoulder, the familiar scent of his cologne filling her senses. "It says I'm home," she whispered, her voice filled with a quiet certainty. Home, not in a place, but in a feeling, a sense of belonging that had eluded her for so long. It was in the laughter of her daughter, the warmth of her husband's embrace, the shared passion of her students, and the melodies that flowed from her fingertips, weaving a tapestry of life, love, and the enduring power of second chances. The studio, bathed in the fading light, felt like a sanctuary, a space where dreams could be resurrected, where broken melodies could be mended, and where the echoes of the past could finally harmonize with the music of the present. Abigail had walked through the shadows and emerged into the light, not as the prodigy she once was, but as a woman who had learned to embrace the imperfect symphony of her life. For sometimes, the most beautiful music is born not from flawless execution, but from the raw, honest expression of a heart that has learned to sing again.